A motel cleaner helped a sick guest at 3 a.m., unaware he was a millionaire, running from a forced wedding. "This is not your job, Julie. You are not paid to knock on doors at this hour." Julie stood at the counter in the dimly lit front office of the motel, rain pattering softly on the windows behind her. Her hair was damp from checking the perimeter, curls clinging to her neck. She looked at Mr. Curtis, the aging manager, whose eyes hadn't left the tiny television on the shelf. "I heard something break. Glass, maybe?" From room 6, Curtis waved her off with a sigh, still focused on the late-night talk show flickering in black and white. "So? That room paid in cash. Guest came in late, alone, probably dropped a glass or a bottle. It's none of our concern." Julie's voice was calm but firm. "If someone's sick or in trouble, they pay to be left alone, not to be babysat. This place survives on minding our own business." Julie hesitated for a moment. Then, without another word, she turned and walked to the key rack behind the desk. She took the spare for room 6 and stepped out into the rain. The motel sat on the edge of an old logging road in rural Oregon, tucked between tall pines and the smell of damp earth. It had once been a lively stop for road trippers and nature lovers, but those days were gone. Now it was mostly silence, the occasional long-haul trucker, and the steady whisper of rain against the roof. Julie moved quickly along the covered walkway, her sneakers splashing in puddles. A flickering bulb buzzed above room 6. She paused outside, listening. No voices. No music. Just the echo of something broken, and the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, it felt wrong. She knocked gently. "Sir? Hello? I work here. I just want to make sure everything's okay." No answer. She knocked again, louder. "I'm coming in, just to check on you." The key slid in smoothly. She pushed the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a television screen on mute. The air was heavy with the scent of damp fabric and something sharp, like sweat and metal. A table lamp lay shattered on the floor. The bedsheets were tangled, kicked to the side. A duffel bag was overturned near the armchair. Clothes spilled out across the carpet. And near the foot of the bed, a man lay collapsed on the floor. Julie stepped inside quickly, heart pounding. He was young, maybe late 20s, early 30s. Dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, shirt sticking to his chest. His lips were pale, his skin flushed and damp. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hand instinctively going to his forehead. Burning hot. "Sir?" she said softly. "Can you hear me?" His head rolled slightly, a groan catching in his throat, but he did not open his eyes. Julie scanned the room for clues. The duffel held little. A change of clothes, a broken phone, a crushed water bottle. On the nightstand, she spotted a boarding pass ripped down the center. The destination read Newark to Portland. The name had been smeared with water. She stepped into the bathroom and flipped on the light. A silver wedding band sat in the bottom of the sink. It looked tossed, rejected. A wallet lay beside it, open but empty. No ID, no credit cards, nothing. She returned to the man's side and gently shook his shoulder. "You need help. I can call an ambulance." But he groaned and barely whispered, "No, no hospital." His voice was dry and cracked. He sounded like someone who hadn't spoken aloud in days. She nodded in agreement and began to help him move onto the bed. Julie steadied his weight as best she could, her arm shaking slightly as she pulled him up from the floor. He was heavier than he looked, his body slack with fever. Each breath he took rattled in his chest, rough and wet, the sound of infection clawing its way through his lungs. She had heard it before, in hospital rooms, in her sister's final days. It was the sound of a body too exhausted to fight. She eased him onto the bed, adjusting the pillow beneath his head. His face was pale, glistening with sweat. He stirred but did not speak, his lips cracked, his skin burning to the touch. His shirt clung to his chest, damp and wrinkled, and his hands twitched now and then in restless fever. Julie worked quickly. She turned off the flickering television and brought the small kettle from the lobby into the room. In 15 minutes, she had warmed up a can of soup on the portable burner and dampened a cloth to cool his forehead. The motel's first aid kit was laughably understocked, mostly Band-Aids and outdated aspirin, but she found enough to give him something mild for the fever. She spooned a bit of soup into a mug and touched it to his lips. He swallowed, slowly, barely conscious. "Just a little," she murmured. "You need it." She didn't ask for a name, didn't press him for answers. Whatever had driven him here, ripped boarding pass, discarded ring, no ID, was not something she needed to understand right now. All that mattered was that he was sick, and someone had to help. After covering him with a blanket and wiping down his forehead one last time, she left a short note on the bedside table. "You don't have to talk. Just rest. You're not alone." She closed the door gently behind her. The next morning the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of pale gray and wet pine. Julie brought clean towels and a thermos of ginger tea to room 6. She knocked once and waited. A hoarse voice answered faintly. "Come in." She opened the door to find him sitting up in bed, legs covered by the blanket. He looked better, still pale but awake. His eyes, a clear gray buhl, watched her with a mix of caution and exhaustion. "You're the one who—" Julie gave a small smile. "Brought soup, yes." He cleared his throat. "Thank you." She set the thermos down on the table and nodded. "You were burning up. Still are, but not as bad. You need fluids, rest, and probably antibiotics. But I figured I'd let you keep your secrets." He looked away, embarrassed. "I wasn't trying to be dramatic." "You passed out," she said simply. "That's not drama. That's your body saying it's had enough." He hesitated. "My name is Evan." She tilted her head. "Is that the real name or the one you want me to use?" He gave a weak chuckle. "It's real, for what it's worth." Julie didn't press further. She opened the curtains a bit, letting in some filtered light. The trees outside swayed gently in the breeze, the forest dense and quiet around them. Evan shifted on the bed. "I should go." Julie turned to him, eyebrows lifted. "You can barely sit up." "I'll find a way." She folded the extra blanket at the foot of the bed and met his gaze. "No one walks out of this forest with a fever and lungs full of rain." He blinked, surprised by her calm certainty. "You're not being held hostage," she said, voice soft, "but you're not walking anywhere today." He sat back against the headboard, exhaling. The fight in him faded. "Fine," he muttered. "One more day." Julie gave a single nod. "Good." She stepped out into the hallway, closing the door gently behind her. Inside, Evan leaned back and stared at the ceiling, the note still folded in his hand. The rain returned on the second morning, soft and steady, whispering against the motel windows like it had never left. Julie woke early and brewed ginger tea in the staff kitchenette. She added honey, wrapped a warm muffin in a napkin, and placed both gently outside the door to room 6. No knock, no sound, just quiet offerings, left like seeds. Evan had not asked for anything. Julie had not asked for answers. That was the unspoken rhythm of those days. He stayed in room 6, wrapped in borrowed blankets, the television off, the blinds half open to the trees. She passed through the hallway like a breeze, leaving soup, folded towels, and warmth behind. On the third day, Julie collected a small bundle of his clothes from outside the door. 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, socks that had seen better days. She washed them in the back laundry room, hung them to dry and pressed them as best she could. Her fingers were gentle as she folded each item, smoothing the fabric with care. Into the pocket of the fresh shirt she tucked a note on a piece of craft paper, written in her looping, quiet hand. "If there ever comes a day you feel like talking, I'll listen. And if not, I'm still here." That evening, she placed the clean clothes outside his door, along with a bowl of stew and a small piece of cornbread. She didn't wait to see if he opened it. Inside, Evan sat on the edge of the bed, the fever now mostly gone. His body still ached, his chest still pulled tight with every breath, but the fog had begun to lift. He'd slept more in these last 3 days than he had in the past 3 months. He picked up the folded shirt and read the note slowly. Something in his chest tugged. The silence wasn't heavy here. It didn't demand anything of him. Julie moved like the forest, quiet, patient, always present. She did not need to know who he was or where he had come from. Somehow that made him want to stay. On the nightstand, the wedding ring still sat in a small dish. For 2 days he had ignored it, pretended it was not there. But now he found himself staring at it. He reached for it. The metal was cool against his fingers, its weight far heavier than it had ever been before. It had once symbolized duty, a transaction dressed up in flowers and tuxedos. A merger, not a marriage. He had worn it out of fear of disappointing his family, of breaking a legacy, of being the selfish one. But it had never been love. He turned the ring over in his palm. Then, slowly, he reached into his duffel and pulled out a handkerchief. He wrapped the ring carefully inside, folded the cloth into a neat square, and set it on the corner of the nightstand. Not thrown, not buried, just put down, with intention, a quiet acceptance. He looked out the window, watching the mist creep through the trees, and thought about how long it had been since he had done anything without a reason, without permission. For the first time in years, he did not feel owned by anyone. Back in the office, Julie watched the rain and sipped her own tea. She didn't expect thanks, didn't need closure. There was something healing about just helping, expecting nothing in return. She had once sat in hospital rooms for weeks at a time, holding her sister's hand without knowing what to say. And she had learned then, sometimes being there was the most powerful thing a person could do. 3 days, no questions, no names spoken beyond what he offered. But that evening, when Julie came by with a small lantern for his room in case the lights flickered again, she found something unexpected outside his door. The bowl washed and placed carefully in a paper bag, and a note folded on top. In clean, deliberate handwriting were 5 words. Thank you for the silence. By the 4th day, the fever had broken, and Evan's breathing was steadier, less ragged. The weight in his chest remained, but it was no longer entirely physical. The rain had eased into a gentle mist, and the pine forest surrounding the motel breathed with the quiet patience of the northwest wilderness. Julie knocked gently that morning, holding a folded sweater in one hand and a fresh thermos of tea in the other. Evan opened the door, slowly but upright. He looked better, tired but no longer like a man drowning in his own body. It'll be chilly in the woods, Julie said, holding out the sweater. It's not pretty, but it's warm. Evan took the soft forest green knit and nodded. Thank you. He pulled it on carefully. It hung a little loose, the sleeves rolled at the cuffs. Yours? Julie shrugged. Used to be my dad's. Now it mostly lives in a drawer. Evan looked past her toward the trees. I could use some fresh air. They walked in silence down the narrow trail behind the motel, where the woods stretched in every direction, moss hanging from the branches like lace. The earth was soft and damp beneath their feet, and the air smelled of wet leaves, cedar, and pine sap. Birdsong fluttered through the trees, distant and delicate. Neither of them spoke for a long while. There was no need. At a small clearing where the sun broke weakly through the clouds, Evan paused, taking in the quiet. This place, it's different. Julie glanced at him. You mean peaceful? He nodded, like the world stops humming for a bit. They continued walking, their footsteps muffled on the damp earth. Eventually they reached a shallow stream where stones jutted above the surface, like stepping stones. Water gurgled softly, flowing downhill with no destination but down. Evan stood watching it for a moment, then said, his voice low, I was supposed to get married next week. Julie didn't react. She crouched beside the stream, running her fingers through the cold water. Not because I wanted to, he continued. It was an arrangement. My family, hers, 2 companies, a merger disguised as vows. Julie looked up at him. And you? I didn't say no for a long time. It felt easier to let it happen than to cause a storm. Julie's fingers stilled in the water. But storms come anyway. He met her eyes. Yes, they do. There was a long pause, not uncomfortable, just full of unsaid things. Julie stood and brushed her hands on her jeans. "So, what now? You run forever?" Evan gave a quiet laugh. "I don't know. Maybe I stop running. Maybe I just walk." Julie tilted her head. "Learning to choose what brings peace instead of what brings approval?" He nodded slowly, as if those words unlocked something he hadn't yet named. They turned to head back, taking a different trail, the trees closing in gently around them. The mist began to thicken, and the moss-covered path grew slippery in places. Julie moved ahead, stepping from rock to rock across a narrow stream bend. But her foot slipped on a patch of wet moss, and she stumbled sideways, her arms flailing to catch balance. In one swift motion, Evan lunged forward and caught her around the waist, pulling her back upright before she could fall. They stood still for a moment, her body against his, the breath knocked slightly out of her chest. She clung to his arm instinctively, heart racing. "Thanks," she whispered, her voice smaller than she expected. Evan didn't let go right away. His hand lingered just long enough to make the moment stretch, fragile and clear. Their eyes met, his stormy and searching, hers wide and steady. In the soft hush of the forest, the space between them seemed to hold something unspoken. It was not romance in the traditional sense. No grand music, no dramatic declaration. It was recognition. Two people, each quietly undone by the past, standing steady in a place where words mattered less than presence. Julie slowly stepped back, brushing a leaf from her jacket. "I'm fine," she said, her voice light but unsteady. Evan didn't answer. He just nodded, and they continued walking side by side, the sound of water and wind filling the silence. By the time they returned to the motel, the sky had darkened slightly, and the lights in the lobby flickered on. But the distance between them had changed, subtle, almost invisible, yet undeniable, and in that new space, something had begun to grow, not loudly, not urgently, but deeply. The rain had stopped the next morning, leaving dew on the pine needles and the faint scent of wood smoke in the air. Birds chirped cautiously from somewhere deep in the trees, and a soft breeze rustled the edges of the motel roof. The world felt as if it were holding its breath. Evan sat at the small desk in room 6, the overhead light dim but steady. In front of him lay a sheet of rough-textured, handmade paper, slightly uneven at the edges, speckled with tiny flecks of dried lavender and pine fiber. He had found it folded in his laundry 2 nights ago, and somehow he knew it was meant for more than writing lists or grocery reminders. Next to it sat a small bottle of brown ink and a pen Julie had once left in the laundry room. The ink smelled faintly of cedar. The pen scratched softly across the paper as he wrote. The words didn't come easily. He wasn't used to saying thank you, not like this, but he took his time. "Julie, you didn't ask where I came from, or why I looked like someone who didn't belong. You didn't ask for anything. You just let me be, quietly, completely, and in that you gave me more peace than I've ever known. This place, you, helped me see myself not as who I was supposed to be, but who I might become. Thank you for the silence, for the soup, and for your stillness. They healed me more than you know." Evan Hay folded the letter carefully and set it beneath the small mug she always left outside his door, the one that had carried tea, broth, even warm milk on the worst night of his fever. Then, from his duffel, he pulled out the square of cloth that had carried his discarded wedding ring. The ring was gone now, left behind somewhere between memory and mercy, but the cloth remained, soft and worn. Inside it he gently placed the handkerchief Julie had left him during the early days, the one she had left folded beside the bowl of soup with a tiny embroidered leaf in the corner. He had kept it, even when he hadn't known why. Evan stood, zipped his bag, and looked around the room one last time. Room 6 had become a kind of pause button on his life. No questions, no pressure. Just air and trees and someone who didn't need to know his resume to see his worth. He stepped outside into the dark, the gravel crunching softly under his boots. No goodbye, no final knock. The trees swayed gently as he disappeared down the road. At dawn, Julie awoke early, as she always did. The sun was barely visible behind a curtain of low gray clouds. She tied her hair up, brewed coffee in the office, and stepped out into the hall to begin her rounds. She knocked once on room 6, balancing a tray with a fresh towel and a muffin. There was no answer. She waited. Knocked again. Still nothing. Julie unlocked the door with the master key. The room was quiet, clean, untouched since the night before. The bed was neatly made, the windows slightly ajar. And on the table, next to an untouched cup of tea, sat her handkerchief, carefully folded, and a single sheet of her handmade paper. Her eyes landed on the mug first, still warm when she had set it there late last night, now cold, steamless. She walked in slowly and picked up the note, reading it word by word, her thumb resting against the edge of the paper where the ink bled faintly. When she finished, she stood in the center of the room for a long time. Then, softly, as if speaking not to the space but to someone just outside it, she said, "I hope you find a place where you don't have to run." Her voice did not tremble. She set the note back down and picked up the mug, wrapping her fingers around its cool porcelain. There were no tears, no aching heartbreak. Just that soft kind of sorrow that follows unexpected goodness leaving your life. Julie opened the window wider, letting the forest air roll in. She stood there for a while, watching the light filter through the branches. Behind her, room 6 held no trace of chaos. No boarding pass, no fevered moans, no wedding ring in the sink, only a note, a folded cloth, and the echo of quiet footsteps that had passed through her world like a breeze in the trees, gentle, brief, and unforgettable. 3 weeks had passed since Evan left. The motel had settled back into its slow rhythm, quiet rooms, a handful of regulars, the scent of pine drifting through the hallways. Julie was folding towels behind the front desk when the bell above the door chimed. "Morning, Julie," came a familiar voice. Mr. Harland, a retired park ranger, stepped inside, dropping his duffel with a soft grunt. "You seen the news yet?" he asked, pulling a folded newspaper from under his arm. "Some billionaire vanished on his wedding day, no warning, big scandal." Julie glanced up. "No, haven't read anything today." "Here." He flattened the paper on the counter, tapping the headline. "Evan Whitaker disappears hours before billion-dollar wedding." A glossy photo showed a man in a tuxedo, sharp features, blank expression, polished to perfection. Julie's hand froze mid-fold. Harlan chuckled, unaware. Fiancée's the daughter of some shipping tycoon. Big merger, big press. Guy just walks away. Some say he snapped. Others think he's hiding in Europe. Julie stared at the photo, not because of the headlines or the spectacle, but because she knew that face. Not the one curated for cameras, but the one she'd seen, sweat-soaked, vulnerable, human. Harlan paused. "Julie, you okay?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, just a long shift." He shrugged and headed off to his room, muttering about the world going mad. When he was gone, Julie took the newspaper and stepped into the small office. She laid it open on the desk, reading the details. Lavish ceremony, 500 guests, a mountain of expectations. The article spoke of legacies and empires, of disappointment and silence. No one knew why he had left. No explanations, no statements. Just a man gone missing. Julie closed the paper gently. She walked to the linen closet and opened the top drawer. Beneath folded towels was the square of fabric she'd once left at his door, a simple handkerchief, embroidered with a tiny leaf. She sat on the edge of the cot in the back room, the cloth resting in her hands. There were no tears, no shock, just a quiet recognition. He hadn't lied. He had told her his name. He had given her silence, presence, honesty in its rawest form, and she had asked for nothing more. She remembered the nights he had sat beside her, without a word, listening to the wind, the way he had steadied her when she slipped by the stream, the slow, patient rhythm of two people healing near each other. She had not needed to know the world he had walked away from. She had only needed to know who he was when the world fell away. Julie folded the handkerchief carefully, smoothing each edge, then slipped it into her pocket, the soft cotton pressed against her leg like memory. That evening she refreshed the vase on the front counter. This time she chose white heather and fern, symbols of solitude and protection, for the man who had not run from her but toward peace. She lit a small candle by the window and sat quietly, breathing in the scent of lavender and pine. The forest hummed beyond the glass, and in the fading light Julie whispered, "I hope you're somewhere the sky feels wide. Not regret, not longing, just hope." That wherever he was, Evan had found what he needed, even if it was not here. It was a quiet night in early spring, nearly a month since Evan had vanished from the edge of the Oregon woods and Julie's life. The sky outside the motel was a shade of deep blue gaw, painted with the final strokes of dusk. The rain had stopped, but mist still curled through the trees like breath on glass. Julie was behind the front desk, sorting keys and closing the register. Most of the rooms were empty. The stillness of off-season had settled in, and she welcomed it, though tonight for some reason it felt a little heavier. She was wiping down the counter when the soft chime of the front door echoed through the room. Her head lifted instinctively. A figure stood just inside, framed by the lamplight. Tall, shoulders square, dressed simply in a dark sweater and jeans. His hair was damp from the mist, but his eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. Julie's breath caught, her fingers stilling on the cloth in her hand. "Evan?" she said quietly. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, the kind of stillness that felt deliberate, like he was afraid one wrong move might shatter the moment. Then, softly, "I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome." Julie blinked, heart pounding in her chest, unsure if she wanted to smile or cry. "You here?" Evan stepped closer. "I am." There was a silence between them, thick, full of everything left unsaid. "I thought I should say thank you," he began, his voice low, steady. "Again. But that's not why I came back." Julie waited, her face unreadable. He met her eyes. "I've had everything. Money, power, a name that opens doors. But I've never had peace, not real peace, not the kind where you sit still and your breath feels like it belongs to you." His gaze didn't waver. "Until you." Julie inhaled slowly. The words landed like rain after drought. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small lavender-flecked note she had once left with his folded clothes. It was worn at the edges, soft from being handled too often. "I've read this more times than I should admit," he said, holding it out. "Not because I was waiting to talk, but because it reminded me that there are still people in the world who give without expecting anything in return. I needed to remember that before I came back." Julie took the note, her fingers brushing his. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, but inside everything stood still. "I don't know what you want me to say," she said softly. Evan looked down, then back up. "I don't expect anything. I know I left, and I know that says something about who I was, but I'm not running anymore. Not from a wedding, not from my name, and not from you." He turned toward the hallway slowly, then walked a few steps, stopping in front of the door to room 6. His hand rested on the knob, familiar and foreign all at once. He looked back at her. "I don't know if you still have space in your heart for someone who disappeared without saying goodbye, but if you do, if there's still room, I'd like to stay, this time on purpose." Julie's throat tightened. She stepped around the counter, her boots quiet on the wood floor. She walked slowly down the hall toward him, her expression soft but guarded. When she reached him, she looked not at the door, but at him. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered, "but I do know this place, room 6, this forest, this quiet, it changed you, and I see it." He held her gaze, every part of him still. "And I see you," she added. Evan smiled, not the careful, practiced kind he wore in glossy photos, but something smaller. Real. Julie reached for the key in her pocket and unlocked the door. It creaked open slowly. Warm air met them. Familiar, pine-scented, home. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. But she left the door open behind her. And that, for now, was enough. Room 6 looked different now. The same walls, the same window, but where there had once been fevered silence, now there was warmth. Candles flickered gently on the windowsill and nightstand, casting soft light over wildflowers, fern, white heather, and tiny violet blooms. Evan stood in the doorway behind Julie, taking it all in. The room where he had once broken down now glowed with something whole. Julie glanced back and smiled. "Come in." He stepped inside. She closed the door behind him. The bed was neatly made, a hand-stitched quilt folded at the foot, 2 bowls of soup steamed on the small table by the window. They sat across from each other, close but unrushed. Outside, the forest whispered. They didn't speak of Manhattan. Not of weddings, legacies, or expectations. Instead, they talked about the woods. About the fox Julie had seen near the creek. About the way light shifted through pine branches at sunset. Evan admitted he hadn't read a novel in over a decade. Julie smiled. She told him how, as a girl, she pressed leaves into notebooks and made paper from old homework. She had done it with her sister, drying it in the sun. "You still make it?" Evan asked. "Sometimes," she said, "when the weather's right." They ate slowly, the candlelight softening the room. Evan watched her more than he spoke. When their tea was poured and the bowls were empty, he looked at her and said quietly, "I didn't just come back for peace. I came back because I found you." Julie's fingers tightened on her mug. "You saw me when I was no one," he added. "That's the version of me I want to stay." She looked out the window, where stars were beginning to pierce through the clouds. "I've learned," she said, "that sometimes people leave because they don't know where they belong, and sometimes they come back, not to a place, but to a person." Evan reached across the table and gently took her hand. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, Evan stayed. He mended stairs, painted the porch, planted lavender near the lobby. More importantly, he listened. Julie spoke of her old dreams, and he asked how they could make them real. One morning he returned from town with boxes, paper molds, natural dyes, handmade tools. They cleared the old shed and turned it into a paper studio. It smelled like cedar and new beginnings. Julie's hands were often ink-stained now. Her smile came more easily. Evan read every book she lent him and left notes scribbled on her handmade paper. Time passed, not rushed, but rich. And one evening, as the sun dipped low, Julie returned to room 6. She opened the window wide and sat at the desk where Evan had once written his thank-you note. She picked up one of her handmade sheets, soft and speckled with violet petals, and wrote, "Sometimes peace lives in silence and stays when we choose it." She folded the paper and placed it on the windowsill. Evan arrived a moment later, tea in hand and quiet joy in his eyes. As the stars blinked to life above the trees, they sat together, no longer 2 people who had saved each other, but 2 who had chosen to stay. Thank you for joining us for this gentle, healing story of quiet courage, unexpected connection, and the kind of love that doesn't need grand gestures, only presence. Julie and Evan's journey reminds us that sometimes the most powerful changes happen not in noise, but in stillness. That peace is not something we find, it's something we choose, and that love, at its truest, begins when we see one another clearly, without needing anything in return. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to become part of our storytelling family. Don't forget to turn on notifications, leave us a comment, and share this video with someone who believes in second chances. Until next time, stay soft, stay hopeful, and remember, sometimes peace lives in silence and stays when we choose it.